Back in the 5th century BC, the Persian Emperor Darius I sought to punish the Greeks for rebelling against him. What ensued was one of the biggest naval clashes of the ancient world. Today on the History Chronicles, we will be examining the conflict between the Greeks and the Persians, which culminated in the Battle of Salamis. In the 5th century BC, the Persian Empire stretched from the shores of the Indian Ocean to the heartlands of modern-day Bulgaria, Ukraine and Romania. The emperor sat in his capital of Persepolis, ruling over peoples from as far afield as Egypt, India and Greece. Indeed, the Persians were the first empire to establish regular routes of communication between the 3 continents of Africa, Asia and Europe. The Persians had begun their conquest through the military achievements of Cyrus the Great. His destruction of neighbouring tribal warlords had led to the unification of the Medians, Lydians and Babylonians under one rule. Further conquest led to subjugation of peoples further afield. Among them were the Ionians, a disparate alliance of Greek towns and islands that grew to resent the proxies that Persia sent to rule them. In 498 BC, the Ionians rallied an army with support from neighbouring Athens and Eretria. With this military support, they burned the city of Sardis in protest at Persian rule. The Persians were not happy. An army was sent after the Ionians and a bitter war ensued, raging for 6 years. It culminated in Persian victory and a decisive defeat of the Ionians at sea in the Battle of Lade. However, the Persians were not done with the Greeks quite yet. In the year 491, the young Persian Emperor Darius I, eager to make his mark on the empire's dominions himself, sent emissaries to all of the Greek city-states, including those that had supported the Ionians in their revolt. He asked for none other than submission to the Persians. The Greek historian Herodotus, from whom much of our information about this period comes, writes of the Persian demand of earth and water. These symbols are said to reflect the Zoroastrian beliefs of the Persians and mean that the Greeks would offer their unconditional subordination to their conquerors. In some Greek cities, the Persian emissaries were well received. The defeat of the Ionians just a few years earlier had evidently left its mark that the Persians were not to be messed with. For the proud Athenians, however, submission to the Persians was something that could not be accepted. They put the Persian ambassadors on trial and had them executed. Down in the city of Sparta, they just threw their emissaries down a well. The 2 cities of Athens and Sparta therefore presented the Emperor Darius with humiliation. In response, he acted swiftly. The Persians rallied an army which soon moved towards and secured domination of the Cyclades. Following this, the army made an amphibious landing in the Bay of Marathon. Here, however, the Persians were overwhelmed by a large Athenian force that fought to defend their city. The Persians withdrew. Once again, the emperor had been humiliated. The following year, 486 BC, was to be yet another dramatic moment for the Persian emperor. A revolt of the Egyptians this time drew the Persians' attention away from the Greeks for the moment. Then, just as the Emperor Darius was going to move against these Egyptian rebels, he himself died of illness. Xerxes, the son and heir designate of Darius the Great, promptly took the reins of the large Persian Empire. He personally led his army against the Egyptian rebels, crushing their revolt in 484 BC and appointing his brother as the new ruler in Egypt. However, after fierce fighting against the Egyptians, the great Persian army was now expended. Another would need to be raised to move against the obstinate Greeks. Meanwhile, the Athenians had long been preparing for war against the Persians. In 482, the Athenian politician Themistocles had led the decision to build a large fleet of galleys to counter the Persian threat. These galleys, named biremes because of their 2 layers of oars for extra power, also featured a large bronze ram on the prow. This enabled them to batter opposing ships, a prominent tactic used in ancient nautical warfare. The Athenians had much to defend after all. Their city, one of the most powerful of the Greek city-states alongside Sparta, had already been inhabited for thousands of years. It had been home to many figures now known as intellectual giants of their age. Socrates, the master of political debate, Aeschylus, the dramatist, and the playwrights Sophocles, Euripides and Aristophanes had all called Athens their home. The ecclesia, or assembly that existed in Athens, was an island of democracy in the ancient world. Its leading politician in the 5th century BC, Themistocles, had argued that a powerful navy was the only way to guarantee Athenian survival against the Persians. The Congress of Greek city-states that met at Corinth in 481 BC now coalesced around the leadership of Athens and Sparta in their rebellious fight against the Persians. In the meantime, the Emperor Xerxes had built up a war fleet of over 1,200 triremes. These ships carried 3 layers of oars, with a size and speed that made them adept to combat out in the open sea. Alongside this massive fleet, Xerxes had a powerful army that was said to consist of over 5 million men. Perhaps this was a bit of an exaggeration by contemporary chroniclers, but a more realistic figure is said to be about 500,000. Nevertheless, this army was still much larger than the 6,000-strong army that could be rallied by the Spartans on land. Next, the Emperor Xerxes made a number of careful moves to ensure the success of his planned invasion. He again sent emissaries to the Greek city-states, but this time purposefully omitted the rebellious Athens and Sparta. Perhaps he was trying to tug at the strings of the fragile Greek alliance. Xerxes also now moved to deal with another huge obstacle in his way. The Hellespond, also known as the Dardanelles, is a large stretch of narrow water located between Asia and Europe. Any invasion force headed for Greece would need to cross this waterway. Such a feat would take dedication and ingenuity. In 480 BC, Xerxes' army crossed the Hellespond, building a 3rd consecutive bridge after the first 2 were wrecked by a storm. The Persians had also spent the last 3 years digging a canal wide enough to accommodate their fleet near Mount Athos. These 2 accomplishments alone signify just how intent the Persian emperor was in destroying his rebellious Greek subjects. But one more danger stood in the Persians' way. The route to southern Greece would require Xerxes' army to travel through the narrow pass of Thermopylae. Here, the immense numbers of the Persian land army would count for little as they attempted to march through an opening that was no more than 50 feet wide. Defending that pass, the Athenian-Spartan alliance placed their 6,000 hoplites under the Spartan king Leonidas. The Persian army drew up in front of the pass and charged the Spartan army repeatedly over the course of 7 days. Unfortunately for the Greeks, however, a local resident named Ephialtes informed the Persians about an alternative route that would take them behind the lines of Leonidas's famed hoplites. In one of history's most famous last stands, the 300 Spartans that remained were outflanked and slaughtered to a man. The historian Herodotus writes down the name of every one of those warriors in his account, stating simply that they deserve to be remembered. The standoff at Thermopylae had cost the Persian army time, soldiers, and 200 ships that were lost to a storm. But now they marched to southern Greece. They entered Athens, where most of the citizenry had fled. Those who remained were killed by the invaders. The Acropolis was torched. But to inflict a meaningful defeat on the Greeks, Xerxes needed a decisive encounter at sea. As the Persian army had approached Athens, the Athenian politician Themistocles had overseen the evacuation of most of the city's inhabitants to the Greek fleet. This now sailed to the safe haven of Salamis. Salamis lay on the isthmus of Corinth, which the Greeks prepared to defend. In an intelligent move, Themistocles sent a slave named Sisinus, a pretend defector to the Emperor Xerxes. Sisinus was equipped with the false information that Greek morale was shattered and their reliance was waning. With this, Xerxes disbanded part of his fleet to cover any escape routes that the Greeks might be seeking. Xerxes was now much more likely to seek battle. What had emerged from the discussions among the Greek leaders was that a battle in close conditions would work to their advantage. Greek ships were smaller and less heavily laden than the Persian war hulks that were best suited for fighting on the open sea. A more confined location for battle would also, as at Thermopylae, reduce the Persians' numerical advantage over the Greeks. As such, the Greek navy was to remain off the coast of Salamis and lure the Persians into battle. Here, the Strait of Salamis provided the narrow inlet of water which, the Greeks believed, was needed to defeat the Persian navy. On the 20th of September 480 BC, the Persian Emperor Xerxes mounted his golden throne high on the hills above Salamis. Here he would watch what he believed would be the final rout of the Greek navy. Themistocles, in command of 50 Corinthian galleys, had already sailed out and spotted the Persian fleet. he ordered his ships to retreat, hoisting their sails to move with speed into the Strait of Salamis. Like a baited bear, the Persians followed. The Persians were unaware, however, that the rest of the Greek fleet lay in wait, out of sight in Salamis' port. Out the Greeks sailed, reportedly singing hymns to the god Apollo. They struck the Persian vanguard, now overextended, and spread out along the narrow stretch of water. Chaos appears to have ensued as the Corinthian ships now too turned around from their false retreat to attack the Persians. Lacking manoeuvrability and formation, the Persian ships were now picked apart, piece by piece, by the Greek navy. The hulls of our vessels rolled over, and the sea was hidden from our sight, choked with wrecks and slaughtered men, wrote the Greek historian and playwright Aeschylus, who also likened the battle to the netting of fish on the shores of the Mediterranean. As the chaos became clear, Xerxes ordered a pontoon bridge to be built across the strait to carry his army over to attack the Athenians. However, with the Greek navy now dominating the water, this move was futile. Xerxes called a council of war. In it, his generals decided that the navy needed to retreat. This retreat is described again by Aeschylus, writing from the perspective this time of the Persians. The Greeks pursued us, and with oars or broken fragments of wreckage struck the survivors' heads as though they were tunnies and a haul of fish. Shrieks and groans rang across the water until nightfall hid us from them. For the Persians, the disaster at Salamis marked the beginning of the end for their campaign against Athens and Sparta. The Persian fleet had lost nearly 200 triremes in the ambush. The Greeks lost only 40 of their ships. Xerxes retired his navy, but left in his wake a force still 300,000 strong. The following spring, the Persians captured Athens once more. This time, however, a combined army of Athenians and Spartans managed to overrun the Persian forces. A defeat was inflicted on the Persians at Plataea that September. In the same month, a Greek fleet gained another victory against the Persians at sea in Mycale. For now, the alliance between the Greek city-states had fended off an attack from the mighty Persia, the effective superpower of the ancient world. With the further defeats of the Persian army and navy at Plataea and Mycale, the threat from the Persians was removed altogether. Over the next 30 years, other regions were able to end their subjugation by the Persian Empire. Thrace, the Aegean Islands, and finally Ionia, the region that had been one of the first to rebel against Persian control. The Battle of Salamis itself, along with the Battle of Thermopylae, have secured almost mythological status in Greek history. They demonstrated Greek resilience against large forces, facing overwhelming odds. The Serpent Column, which now stands in modern-day Istanbul, was made in celebration of the naval victory at Salamis. The 300 Spartans, who remained to defend the pass of Thermopylae, were not only celebrated by Herodotus, but have also found their place in 21st century culture in the film 300. But it is perhaps the long-term significance of these Greek victories that stands out the most. For it is from Greek culture, its politics and society, that Western Europe has drawn its influences over the hundreds of years since. The defeat of the Persians in this part of the Greco-Persian War enabled the world of ancient Greece to flourish once again. From this, perhaps a great part of our worldview today, our political outlook and our social experiences, rest on the outcome of a conflict that took place over 2,000 years ago. Thank you very much for watching this episode of the History Chronicles. I do hope that you've enjoyed it. Please do like, subscribe, leave a comment as to what you think on the Battle of Salamis, and I look forward to seeing you next time for some more history.